We now have the third and final moment of the dialectic, which focuses on the actual reciprocal confession and forgiveness of sins proper. The result of the preceding movement is that acting conscience has come to recognize judging conscience as evil, as constituted in the same manner as itself. Seeing their identity, the former, with the words, "I am wicked," openly confesses himself to the latter and anticipates the other's reciprocation, which will bring about reciprocal recognition. This confession on the part of acting conscience is the first moment of reconciliation. What remains is for judging conscience to give its own similar confession. Here is a summary in dialogue form. Judge, admit you are evil and a hypocrite, for you say you act from duty, yet all your acts reflect not the universal, but your individual particular being. Actor, okay, since I see you are the same as myself, I admit I'm evil and a hypocrite. But due to the situation I find myself in, that is, that all acts have a universal and particular side, I see there's nothing I can do about it. Duty implies acts which imply particularity. This being so, please forgive me. Judge, okay, I forgive you. I see your plight and your innocence. Your situation is excusable. I also recognize my evil and one-sidedness and need of your recognition. End quote. The result is that both consciences have become the unity of opposites. You, I. In confessing itself, acting or individual conscience declared its individuality or self to be cancelled, i.e., to be a moment of the whole. Its knowledge is now completed with individual and universal sides. In judging or universal conscience, confessing, it likewise rids itself of its one-sidedness. By acknowledging its counterpart's self, it identifies its essence with this real acting individual self and announces its universality qua abstract duty to be a moment, its knowledge now finding its completion in the same manner. In short, we are now beyond good and evil, guilt, and judging and being judged. Both consciousnesses have thus had their knowledge universalized or have become universal knowledges. Perhaps here we should be reminded that at this stage in the Phenomenology's dialectic, we are at a point where realities other than knowledge or certainty of self do not exist, have all been transcended, aufgehoben. We are strictly in a universe of knowledge or knowing, as Hegel recalls in the last chapter. Quote, "This mode of moral experience knows its knowledge as the absolute essential element, knows no other objective being than pure will or pure knowledge. It is nothing but merely this will and this knowledge. Any other possesses merely non-essential being, i.e., being that has no inherent nature per se." End quote. Hence, in this sphere, the only object standing over against me and capable of limiting and restricting the comprehensiveness and absoluteness of my knowledge and my self-certainty is another self-certain knowledge like myself. With the knowledge which assures my complete identity and equality with this other, my knowledge has become absolute and the sphere and scope of my existence unlimited. This is true, absolute freedom. Thus, what emerges from the reconciliation of individual and universal spirit is nothing short of absolute spirit. An absolute spirit is the concrete, not abstract, actual I, which is universal knowledge of self in its absolute opposite. In an absolute opposite, which is itself universal knowledge. It is the knowledge of an I, which having been expanded into a duality, remains in its opposite one and identical with itself. And what is more, possesses the certainty of itself in its complete relinquishment and its opposite. An absolute spirit finds the element of its actualization in a community of I's, in the experience of an I that is we and a we that is I. And this is both Reich Gottes and reciprocal recognition. Thus, the reciprocal recognition, which was demanded in the earlier master-slave relationship, is now finally realized and consummated. For, quote, the reconciling yes is a reciprocal recognition which is absolute spirit or God, end quote. As we have said, since each self is equally the concept, we, you and I, are each other's own being and creation. We are equally, absolutely independent and free, yet I am you and you are me. To recap, we began spirit certain of itself, with spirit knowing itself, its knowledge and will, as all reality, which needs only to be actualized. And this happens by a movement from separation to unification. The moral goal is to realize Reich Gottes, the kingdom of God in the here and now, the highest good, which is the purpose of Kantian morality, which attempts this by a separation of duty and the self and morality and the world, which proved incoherent and collapsed, advancing us to conscience, which began with the understanding that duty and the self, morality and the world were one. After conscience split into acting individual and judging universal conscience, and their opposition and conflict were resolved, the actualization of spirit as all reality and Reich Gottes became complete. Also to be mentioned is that conscience, as well as morality, has been transcended, and this because forgiveness has replaced conviction. With the forgiveness of sins or evil, conscience's conviction as to what is good or evil is no longer binding. 3 final points. 1. The reason why we now have absolute spirit is because spirit is no longer relative. For each self or I in the world community of I's is the same, is a UI unity of universality and individuality. Thus, in relating to another I, to other I's, it is relating only to itself. Hence, it is absolute. 2. As we said, Reich Gottes is a world community of immortal I's, a single substance of independent I's who, in their opposition, enjoy perfect freedom. Reich Gottes has now been realized for us, not for consciousness itself, which will happen in absolute knowledge when religion's content receives morality's form, that of the concept. And this is why we must now transition to religion, which also must happen in order to bring the last remaining object of consciousness, religion's God, into the concept, that it may be the absolute concept. As Hegel says at the start of the last chapter, quote, "The spirit of the revealed religion has not yet overcome its consciousness of an object and other as such. Its actual self-consciousness is not yet the object of its consciousness," end quote. 3. This identity of the two UI selves, which is absolute spirit, is absolute knowledge, which happens, as Hegel said in the introduction, at, quote, "the point where knowledge no longer needs to go beyond itself," end quote, where we have a knowing of knowing, and the, quote, "opposition of consciousness to an object or not I is overcome," end quote. Indeed, absolute knowledge and Reich Gottes both signify the end of human history. History being nothing but the saga and travails of consciousness of an object, and which necessarily comes to an end with consciousness of consciousness, the knowing of knowing, that is, self-consciousness. Next time, we will take up CC, religion, and its 3 phases: A, natural religion; B, Greek religion in the form of art; and C, the revealed Judeo-Christian religion. We will discover that religion for Hegel does indeed know the truth, one's unity with God being the absolute, but in a form, picture thinking, which keeps it alienated due to a split into a here and a beyond, necessitating an advance to absolute knowledge and the concept. Then we shall make our transition to CDD, absolute knowledge. Thank you.